call this meeting to order at 5:31.
And I'll go ahead and give you a roll call. Committee member Chris Klein,
Present.
committee member Lee Heller,
Present.
committee member Lori Gaskin,
Present.
committee member Stephanie Moray,
Present.
committee member Penny Owens, absent. Committee member Todd Rulon Miller, absent as well, and Chair Ann Burdett.
Present.
Perfect.
The next item is the approval of the minutes from January. And do I have a motion that is as written on the agenda?
I will move approval of the minutes.
Second.
Would you like a roll call vote or just an all in favor?
Probably just all in favor. All in favor, aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, minutes pass.
Do we have any agenda adjustments?
We do not.
Do we have any public comment for items that are not scheduled on the agenda? Are there any committee member and staff communications?
The only one I will bring up is that next month, our March meeting will be the budget subcommittee meeting.
And then I guess we're on to item 7A, the Santa Barbara Airport Climate Adaptation Plan.
Yeah, and I will jump in, Chair Burdett, to introduce, we have Jessica Metzger here from our airport. She's the project planner managing this project, as well as their consultant, Nick Garrity.
Great, thank you very much, and good evening, members. So we're here to give you a brief overview of our climate adaptation plan draft that we are going through the process of completing at Santa Barbara Airport. Just to give you a summary of the PowerPoint that we're going to be presenting today, we'll go briefly into our climate vulnerability assessment and then give you an overview of our adaptation plan measures, and then hopefully get some input from you. And before we jump into the presentation, I want to let you know that everything that I'm showing today is online, especially with the climate vulnerability assessment. We just briefly touch on it. That was a whole 2-year process. So if you'd like more information about that, feel free to contact me. I can give you the website and walk you through that. The scope for our climate adaptation plan was looking at identifying future potential adaptation measures and really looking at what we could do in the immediate near term to assuage the flooding problems that we've had at the airport. We're lucky with this adaptation plan. We received 2 separate grants from the Coastal Commission to kick it off, as well as money from the airport's enterprise fund. And that was due to the realization that flooding is happening more and more frequently at this regional transportation hub that is the Santa Barbara Airport. And we really need to look at how best to do immediate things to fix that. And so the end of this CAP is to take policies from these adaptation measures and incorporate them in our local coastal program, which is a document that governs development in the future at the airport. So going into our vulnerability assessment, we look at a variety of different things for this vulnerability assessment, including flooding, both historic and current. You'll see more pictures of that as we go through the presentation. We do an analysis of that and also look at our assets. So that was a large part of the vulnerability assessment, was just mapping all of the assets that we have on the Santa Barbara Airport. So that includes buildings, that includes infrastructure, manholes, pipes, etc. You'll see we have a full map of that. And then overlaying that with the data that we gathered to see which areas were most vulnerable quickest. And also in part of that, we had a review of the economics of what closing the airport does to the enterprise fund that the airport runs out of and the larger region. And then I'm assuming most people have at least flown out of SBA once. You'll know that we have a wonderful ecological gem directly next to our airport, which is the Goleta Slough. And so also as part of this plan, we're looking at how to maintain those very critical habitats that we have on the city property and keep them from changing with sea level rise and with the increase in precipitation that we model. So this is a kind of a graphic of what we've seen in flooding at the Santa Barbara Airport since 1995. By no means is this 1995 date the first time flooding occurred. In 1860 is one of the first real data captures of large flooding events at the Goleta Slough. And it actually changed the name of the area. Before the 1860s floods, which happened up and down the entire California coast, it was an estuary. Boats went into this estuary. It was deep, and it was a completely different environment. And over these months of nonstop rainfall, it filled in with sediment from the Santa Ynez Mountains, and then hence after was called the Goleta Slough, and changed the habitats and the nature environment completely. And then as you have seen in the last season, we closed the airport 3 times, twice in 2025 and once in 2026 because of this rainfall. We used sea level rise scenarios from the Ocean Protection Center or Council's sea level rise guidance. It was actually updated as we were doing this plan, so it's the most current guidance. And we looked most specifically at the intermediate high risk. This is just a graphic to kind of show what I've already kind of talked about, is that we're getting increased intense rainfall. So rain is just happening at a higher frequency. And when you look at the airport, if you imagine waiting for your plane there, we have our wonderful Santa Ynez Mountains to the north. Those are 7 watersheds that all drain directly into the bathtub that is the Goleta Slough and the airport. And so when you have frequent storm events like in 2025 and then followed again by another storm event in 2026, the water just doesn't have very many places to go. And so we're looking to rectify that in this plan. In the precipitation modeling that ESA put together for us for this plan, we're looking at storms that used to happen every 20 years, now being increased to be every 5 years in the future. So this is a real needed plan. These measures are needed to be implemented and not just planned for. When we started out the plan, we actually called it the sea level rise plan for the airport, because looking at the airport, you know, we're right there on Goleta Beach. It seemed like a natural thing to start calling it. When we pulled all the data together, we realized the rainfall was actually more of a concern in the immediate time. Sea level rise, as you see from this slide, is still a very serious threat. If we look at 3.5 feet of sea level rise, which will be reached at roughly 2090, the airport is non-functional. But that's if you do nothing. And just putting the money towards these planning projects, we're already doing something. And we'll see later in the slides how we're doing things on the ground now. So this is the asset map that I talked about earlier. And you'll see with the areas circled in the orange, the most concerning areas are in the northwest quadrant of the airport parcel there, and also down towards the terminal. And this shows all of those assets that I spoke about. And once again, this is available online as well. For our timeframes and vulnerabilities, this shows the various parts that we broke the adaptation measures into. So we have ongoing and planned efforts that are happening right now on the ground at the airport. We have immediate next steps, which are being permitted right now at the airport, and then near term, which is really what this plan is focused on. But because of the timing of us starting this plan in 2023, we were able to dovetail it with other work efforts that were also addressing flooding, which you'll see in a couple other slides. So the adaptation plan framework this is already happening. We need to get it done as soon as possible. And every time we put a new measure in place and implement it, we are going to look at all of those future measures and see how that new measure affects those future measures, because this is an interconnected system. You guys are on this committee, you know that very well. So talking about ongoing and planned adaptation measures. So the county has been dredging Carneros Creek in 2 different areas, and the top of Tecleotito Creek in the airport parcel for quite some time. And that dredging has been successful in keeping those culverts that go under Hollister clear of debris. But over the past 4 years, with the increase in flooding, it hasn't been enough to keep up, and their permitting is going to lapse, and so we need a new stopgap for that. We at the airport looked at that and the problems that we were having with Carneros Creek in 2022 and 23, and had the idea of putting K-rail against the bank of Carneros Creek where we knew it was overtopping from past flooding events. And that's what you see on the right here. And those K-rails are what Caltrans uses to separate traffic. So we are using it to separate water from our airfield. They have been met with some successes. They definitely, in this last storm events, kept sediment from flowing into the taxiway and runway system, but water was still getting through with the amount that was coming down. Additionally, we also use what's called a tiger dam, and that's that orange dam there. So this is an inflatable dam that anchors to the soil, and that was used to keep Firestone Ditch from overtopping. Unfortunately, due to the amount of rain that we had, the anchors that were put into the dirt that was the top of bank of the creek didn't hold once the dirt became mud. And so not as successful as it could have been, but in smaller storms, very successful. It was just the amount of rain that we had during these last 2. In 2024, early in February, we also started looking at Carneros Creek and the full hydrologic capacity of it. Carneros Creek was rerouted in 2006 to provide for additional runway length that was needed for FAA safety standards. And the way that it was rerouted, it was not maintaining the level of capacity that it was designed for. And so we started a project to permit it to take it back to its design stage of 2006. That is still in play at this point in time. We had in December felt that we would have the permit package ready in March to go to all of the agencies involved, but due to the emergency of the flooding that we had in this last season, that's been pushed back a bit, but it's almost complete. And then also, as I touched on earlier, our drainage master plan was completed in 2024. So that's one of the projects where our consultants were able to work with each other and share data and information. The drainage master plan looked at all pipes and culverts and outfalls and manfalls of the airport and assessed the conditions of them and which ones might need to be upscaled, which ones might need to be replaced due to just not having maintenance and review of their condition in the past. And so we're still implementing items from that list. Although you can't see the list, the color coding on the side of the map in the middle shows the immediate needs versus the more long and midterm, much like this project. And then we also have a couple projects that aren't airport specific necessarily, but will help with the overall system. And I'm actually going to start from the bottom of the slide with this. The Coastal Commission has a large grant for looking at the slough as a whole, which is a lot bigger than just the airport parcel, and resiliency for that whole system. And so they will be looking for projects to benefit the whole system and funding a couple of those in the next year or so. And then UCSB, who we work with very closely, being one of our neighbors, much like we do with the city of Goleta and the county being the owner of Goleta Beach, has a tidal restoration project. So that's the polygon in yellow on your right. This currently is not open to tides, has a tidal gate, and this grant is going to remove the tidal gate and study what that change will do. So that also could help the system. And then the last airport project that's been in the planning stage for a couple years is another safety project that the FAA has dictated. We go through review with the FAA every 5 to 10 years and update our master plans, and that's when they say nationally these things are the safety standards, runways and taxiway lengths and widths. Taxiway B needs to be extended to meet FAA standards, so that's shown here. But as part of that, we'll have the opportunity to do mitigation and restoration areas, which could help with flooding, and Nick will be talking about that more in his part of the presentation. So I will hand it over to Nick now.
Thank you, Jessica. So I'll talk through the proposed. Closer? Okay. I'll talk through the proposed adaptation measures, focusing on the near term, which is through about next 5 to 20 years, through 2050. You'll see the list on the left are adaptation measures focused on Goleta Slough and the creeks. And then on the right are the airport operations area adaptation measures, which are more on-site within the airport, what measures will be taken. So we have slides on those, but I'm going to skip over those and just focus on the adaptation measures relevant to Goleta Slough and the creeks. So first, here in the northwest of the airport, Carneros Creek crosses under Hollister Boulevard, Road, and joins with Tecolotito Creek here. And this is an area of flooding. And there's, as Jessica explained, a temporary K-rail here that prevents sediment and some flooding. And a measure would be to replace that with a permanent berm, which would be an earth berm, could be vegetated, and would further reduce flooding from Carneros Creek onto the airport. And I'm just going to move right through. Happy to circle back to any of these to talk about them in more detail. Next would be to looking at the north side of Carneros Creek to restore this area to floodplain. So just this is yellow shaded areas showing broadly where this opportunity could occur through lowering the grades, removing sediment, restoring riparian habitat. That could help lower the flood level through this area where flooding, this is usually where the creeks first start to flood onto the airport. As part of that, on the left, you can see there's a airport maintenance yard here that could be removed to help facilitate that expansion, potentially realigning the creek channel through here to soften this bend in the creek. The sediment and flood management are important to consider here. There's already ongoing sediment management, as Jessica explained, and further analysis of this measure and all of the measures I'm talking about would be required to ensure that, one, it is effective in reducing flood levels. 2, that it doesn't inadvertently increase flood levels somewhere else. And 3, that it doesn't, it helps with sediment management and is compatible with ongoing sediment management. Next measure in this area would be to consider a detention basin. So rather than just restoring riparian habitat and using kind of a nature-based approach to flood and sediment management, to have a more of a managed system that could hold floodwaters and potentially provide additional area for sediment to drop out and be removed. All of these measures in the north would need to consider the fact that the taxiway extension Jessica mentioned that is planned, mitigation is required for that. This is an area that is planned for that mitigation, so these measures would need to be compatible with that mitigation, as well as some prior mitigation in this area. So moving downstream, one, first to mention that the overall goal here is to increase flood conveyance. This is the downstream end of the creek, so very close to the ocean. The velocities and the slope of the water reduce in this area, so things naturally slow down, sediment drops out, and we want to keep that try to keep the water moving through the system. So looking at how turning this corner here, the channel corridor could be expanded, and then continuing downstream, the slough is essentially levied on both sides through this area. The green areas on either side of the creek are levied, former tidal areas. And then when you get farther downstream, these blue areas are all tidal areas. So those are open to creek flows and the tides. And then this purple area is the UCSP planned tidal restoration behind tide gates. So the measure contemplated here is to remove or breach these levees, set those back where needed to provide flood control for the developed perimeter, but to restore the habitat here in green that would help to, it essentially expands the channel corridor, the floodplain, can reduce flood levels by increasing conveyance and flood storage. And then on the north side of the creek here in red, while these areas are already open to the tides, there are remnant levees there, which could be removed to restore habitat and further increase floodplain conveyance. Next measure is a sediment management measure. So in addition to just expanding the floodplain, thinking about new ways to manage the sediment. This is a method of dredging and then spraying the dredge material over the existing wetlands. And it's used in other regions in the US and is an effective way to both dredge and to sustain wetland habitats. With sea level rise, wetlands will tend to be drowned out and vegetation is projected to be lost in the long term. So adding sediment to wetland areas could be a benefit. This method has been tested at Seal Beach wetlands in North Orange County and it's been monitored as a test example. There's been some success there, and so while it's complicated, there's some likelihood of it being permitted. Next measure, moving back to the north along the Firestone Channel, along Firestone Road, would be to expand that channel, clear some vegetation, and potentially couple it with a detention basin here in this open field, which is, there's some planned development at this part of the airport, but there is space that still could be used for flood detention of stormwater, either overflowing from the channel or running off from the airport. Then moving on, I think that's most of the creek measures. So moving more into the airport proper, so all those measures are intended to reduce flooding from the creeks offsite onto the airport onsite. Looking onsite at the airport, high groundwater. First, the groundwater already is high at the airport, and groundwater levels are projected to increase with sea level rise. As the ocean water rises, the groundwater rises with it. So measures that could be taken to address that are dewatering it where needed, and in addition, raising elevations so they're higher above the groundwater. Okay, this is where I'm going to start skipping over some of the airport operations area measures. There's a storm drain system that drains stormwater runoff from the airport. There's the idea of, or the measure of adding pump systems to pump that water out to the creeks when needed, as well as looking at infiltration or detention galleries where groundwater levels are not too high to allow for that. So that may requires more assessment to whether those are actually feasible, but to store and then discharge stormwater. I'll skip over these details of the pump systems and move to another measure would be to add flood walls, either around select buildings or potentially along the creek corridor. You can see in this bottom left photo, this is an existing building that has a low flood wall around it to address flooding. So, and then you can see on the top a flood wall that is being deployed during a flood event. That's one option. As well as on the bottom right, this is more like to protect a building. There's options to raise a flood barrier. So that covers the near-term measures that have been identified in the plan. In the midterm, the success of near-term measures will be assessed, and that will be used to refine the plan in the midterm as conditions improve, what other measures can be taken or are needed. There is also identified the measure of looking at upstream flood and sediment detention in coordination with other jurisdictions outside of the city boundaries, so City of Goleta and the county. There's actually looks to be some feasible options just upstream on Carneros Creek. Some space available for potentially, there's other land uses there like agriculture, but possibly there's some opportunity there. As well as raising the airfield over time. That's complicated because once you raise one part, airport has to be flat. So it all has to kind of taper out or all be raised together. So it's not really feasible just to raise it all up all at once. So here's some more details on that process I won't go to, raising the airport and the runway. So moving to long-term, then looking out to 2080 to 2090 timeframe with 2.5 to 3.3 feet. Again, the plan is to reassess at that point, refine the long-term plan, and consider, at a broader scale, the costs and impacts of continuing to protect the airport in place, the measure of a regional levee and flood control channel system. Because the airport is right in the middle of the floodplain, just trying to ring it with levees, for example, is not really feasible because that's going to increase flooding elsewhere. The real way to do it would be to have flood levees going all the way up the creeks to completely confine the floodplain. That would require a coordinated effort with City of Goleta and the county, and it would be a huge project to consider. Elevating the airport above flood levels, again, that would be another major effort. The other thing that can be considered is regional air service solutions, so looking to other airports to to support or potentially relocating the airport. That's not something that will be looked at as part of this plan, but is acknowledged as a potential long-term measure that may need to be considered. So our next steps in terms of completing this plan are to cost out 3 measures. They're not necessarily the preferred measures. They're just 3 that are more near-term measures to get a range of costs, potential costs for the plan. So we're proposing to cost out the berm along Carneros Creek and restoring wetland floodplain north of Carneros Creek, as well as improvements to the Firestone Road channel. And as I mentioned, all of these measures will require further feasibility study, hydraulic analysis, and modeling to confirm their effectiveness. This step is to really identify what the potential measures are so that those can be studied further. Along with that will be the development of conceptual plans and more detailed cost estimates. That's not currently within the scope of the grant and preparation of this plan, but is a next step. As part of this plan, we'll be costing out those 3 measures. And then another immediate recommendation is just to move forward with implementation of the drainage master plan. So the recommendation is for the committee to receive this presentation and provide comments on the climate adaptation plan and the draft adaptation measures we've presented.
And if anyone has any questions, we can go back to any slides that you want. We wanted to give you the overview of the Moore Creek side, but if you're interested in the airport side, we're happy to go over that too. This is just the team that worked on this project. We had a whole bunch of people doing various parts. It's a large project, and being airport specific, there's a lot of technical requirements from the federal government that we have to look at in doing these plans. And so we had ESA, who had great background, and Mead and Hunt working with us. So thank you to them.
Chair Ann, you can open it up to
Okay,
questions.
to the committee questions first before public comment. Okay. Committee member Gaskin?
Thank you. Just for clarity, this plan, while it mentions midterm and long-term, is really solely focused on short-term, near-term? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate. We are focused on near term in terms of identifying the measures that the city can move forward with now to address the ongoing flooding. And then beyond that, it's more identifying a planning process to, once those are implemented, continue to monitor the flood impacts, the performance of measures that are implemented, and then reassessing what's needed next. So we're trying to identify the full scope of potential adaptation measures from the near term to the long term, because really flood thresholds for the airport have already been exceeded. Like in adaptation planning, we talk about defining a certain threshold at which adaptation is needed. Really, the airport has already crossed that threshold, which is why they're planning and implementing measures already. So these are the additional measures that could be taken in the near term to further address and head off increase in flooding. And we have considered the long-term measures. That's just, those are some of the larger scale ones, like regional flood protection or moving the airport, for example, are not the focus, given those are further off.
So follow-up question. So the near term is 20 years, I think you said, and then the long term goes out to 60. So that's 1/3 of the time that you're looking at it. So when does the airport planning process take into account, not only are you just said exceeding that threshold, we're well into, that threshold. But it sounds like it's planning in a vacuum of this artificial 20-year. When will this plan be incorporated into what clearly needs to be a long-term plan implementation process? I'm unclear about the vacuum that it seems like this plan is in. So just clarity on.
So the vulnerability assessment is looking out up to beyond 3.3 feet. I mean, really, we're until 2090. At that point, we did look a little bit further, but and then by that we identified that at 2090, due to sea level rise, regular tidal inundation, the airport would, without any other effort, be inoperable. So in that sense, it does start by looking long term, and then identifies that really that action is needed in the near term over the next 20 years. If implementing all of these measures identified in 20 years would be amazing. Some of them will probably take longer than that. And so in that sense, we're not intending it to be just a near-term plan. More so, we are looking over the long term, but identifying that the need is really near-term. So instead of taking these adaptation measures and kind of planning them out over till 2090, it's more, we identified all the measures needed over this time frame and then identified, well, they're needed in the near term. And that's really why the focus is near term.
Committee Member Murray?
I had a question on, I guess, slide 24 on the sediment augmentation. And I was curious about sediment and how that factors in. I mean, it's probably urbanized at this point. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. That sediment would need to be tested and deemed appropriate for wetland placement before a measure like that would be permitted and implemented. I think the good news is that the sediment that is removed already at just downstream of Hollister is that the county removes. Most of that, if not all, is clean and is what's placed on Goleta Beach, the sand portion, and then they have other places to dispose of the rest of it, but none of it is considered toxic that I'm aware of.
Yeah, just to confirm that everything that the county removed from their 2 or 3 dredging areas was tested and placed on Goleta Beach. It was cleared for that. There, because they have had that maintenance over time, it's very sandy, and so it can go straight to the beach.
Oh, nice.
What we took out as the airport of Carneros Creek was very loamy and very vegetated because that debris had built up. So it was cattails and bulrush, and so it's a different story. And of course, we'd have to do, if we were using that sediment, it'd be a different process. But if we continue to do more regular maintenance, we'll get to that sandy point.
Great. And then in reference to slide 32, I was curious on these longer-term methods of something we've discussed here relative to Santa Barbara. Is there any conversation with the city of Goleta about integrating kind of standard surface and stormwater methods, like keeping water on site during buildings, and I mean permanently, making it more spongy underneath, or having bioswales or other things to sort of keep this water from hitting the impermeable surface so quickly during these large rain events?
Yes, we are actually in conversation with the city of Goleta and the other jurisdictions that surround the airport quite frequently. We have a every other month meeting of the Goleta Slough Management Committee, which has 215 members that get the invitations. And they are anywhere from NGOs to jurisdictions to agencies, both federal and state, who come together to talk about Goleta Slough issues specifically. And that's the larger Goleta Slough that I spoke of with the Coastal Commission grant, not just the airport portion of the Goleta Slough. And with the city of Goleta specifically, recently they received some grants to unharden Carneros Creek and some other creeks. Unfortunately, they had some personnel change, so it's kind of stalled at this point, but we're still in conversations with them and always looking for opportunities to partner to make sure that we're looking at this system and not just an island of our parcel.
Great. And then lastly, on your measures selected for the costing, what was your decision-making process for that? Because you had a lot of options.
Yeah, so I'll speak to that. We have an engineering division that works at the airport, and we looked at the full suite of measures that Nick and ESA brought to us, and really be looking at, with our management team, what will bring the quickest value to stopping the flooding as happening as frequently as it is. And those were determined by our engineering team as the quickest bang for the buck, basically.
Okay, thank you.
Committee Member Gaskin?
I'm sorry. It's such an interesting, faceted jurisdictional piece of property. So is the city of Santa Barbara, who owns the property, under the regulatory authority of the Coastal Commission?
Yes.
Any projects you do on site?
Yes, so it is a very interesting area to work in. There are a lot of people jurisdictions that are caring about the Goleta Slough for good reason. And so let's just use the Carneros Creek project. I said we started trying to bring that creek back to how it was designed last year. So we have to get permits not only from the Coastal Commission, but also from the Army Corps, Regional Water Quality Board, and Fish and Wildlife of California. And so you're working with all of these different jurisdictions who have different definitions for wetlands, who have different areas of the slough that they care the most about, but all of those are important in putting that pie together. And so it's a very complicated area to work in. And that's why permitting takes longer than other projects. But with this foundation of these adaptation measures and these organizations knowing that we're going through this process, hopefully that will expedite some of that in the future.
I have a question with reference to the long-term on slide 34. I know that this is not like the main focus of this plan, but I was just curious about the regional levee and flood control system. Is that talking about just Carneros Creek or all the 7 watersheds leading into the slough? And is this like talking about like the channelization that we see in other cities to contain like floodwater like into the banks of the creek, or is it more like levees that are between the banks of the creek and the nearby development? Or maybe this hasn't already been like fleshed out because it's long term, but I was just curious.
Yeah, so if I understand your question, when we're talking about the levee system, when the airport was constructed by the Marine Corps back in World War II, they put levees on most of the creeks. And so if you go out into the field, there's levees on both sides of the creek. Basically, it's from the start of Hollister here down to about this point, and then there's only a levee on one side. And so just studying what changing that levee system would do, both for rainfall and for tidal flows. Do you have anything to add to that, Nick?
Yeah, am I on? Yes. As a long-term major adaptation measure, if you look at the floodplain, the FEMA floodplain for this area, the entire area is within the FEMA floodplain, including portions of city of Goleta. And so to really address that, it could, a measure that could be taken is a system of levees like you're thinking of in other places that separate the development from the floodplain, channelize flows, that might not necessarily need to look like some flood control channels that might come to mind. There's, more modern ways of doing it that are more environmentally sensitive, but still we're talking about major land use changes and flood control project. And it hasn't been fully fleshed out because it is a long-term measure and so complicated and really, the focus of trying to address the flooding that's happening now with measures that are clearly feasible.
That answers my question. Committee Member Murray.
Hi, I was just trying to understand. It's really hard because there's such tiny little pictures. There's a floodplain area, floodplain creation, like on 20, and then you have channel expansion, and you also have building berms up. But I just, the floodplain is so that it goes over onto the floodplain, but you're building more berms. That was just a little point of confusion. But I also wanted to mention that I've lived in Portland, Oregon, and in Louisiana, and the flood wall idea that you showed, it's actually really effective, weirdly enough, where people just come out and quickly put in these flood walls. I've seen them in action in 2 large cities to great success.
Thank you.
Yeah, and they are part of the plan. It's good to hear of those examples. Just to clarify on your first part of your question, were you referring to, I guess just to clarify, the plan, if you can see better on the screen, is to consider building a berm along the south side of Carneros Creek where floodwater first floods onto the airport, and then further downstream open the channel up there. And these red lines here would be actually removal of remnant levees to further expand the channel.
Okay.
So it's a combination of building additional flood protection here and then expanding the channel downstream.
Where is it on that map that you wanted to take sediment out?
Well, there's ongoing maintenance of Carneros Creek here and planned continuing maintenance. And then in terms of the dredge and spray method, that could be employed all along Goleta Slough. There would need to, identify where it's most effective through further study.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Are there any public comments on this issue?
No, Chair.
Then, if not, then we will move on to item 7B, invasive plant removal program update.
Do we want to open it up to the committee for final comments, feedback?
Are there any final comments or feedback from the committee on number 7A? Committee Member Heller?
I didn't put this as a question because it seems too big, but I'm just thinking about the cost looking forward, particularly in the long term, and talking about, for example, elevating the entire airport or relocating it. So I'm not going to ask you any questions because I feel like that would put you in a difficult spot, but I am mindful, as I suspect we all are, of what a huge lift that would be.
Committee Member Gaskin?
Thank you. I have two comments. One, thank you so much for this presentation and this particular focus on the creeks, and I'm trying to follow along with my satellite imagery as well. My one comment is that I so hope we don't silo these planning efforts when we know what's happening on down the line, and that's why I focused on the long term. I am involved in an organization that very much focuses on the natural functioning of the slough/estuary. And while we can't go back in time, we, I think, have an obligation and responsibility to do what's right for the long term and for generations to come. Now, what's right might be different with everyone in this room, but certainly from an environmental standpoint, I just really urge the airport to have a vision that's really clear and that we don't kick the can down the road.
Any other comments from committee members? If not, then we will move on to number 7B.
All right, Chair, I just want to say thank you again to Jessica and Nick for joining us and giving that presentation. Up next, we have our invasive plant removal program update. Evan Hobson, who is our Creeks Restoration Planner in the Creeks Division, will be presenting.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all again. My name is Evan. I'm going to present to you just kind of a nice general update on our invasive plant removal program that the Creeks has done, or at least tried to do every year. In 2008, the Creeks Division initiated the invasive plant removal program, focusing on non-native, high-priority invasive plant species in and around our creeks within the city limits. One of those primary species being giant reed or Arundodonax. And I include this picture here just to help present the scale at which this invasive species can take over and invade our waterways. And it's a large statured invasive grass. It reproduces vegetatively, so plants wash downstream during high flows and colonize new areas, whether they're intact or disturbed. That recent disturbance helps them colonize more easily, but they can invade, relatively healthy habitats as well. But this can be, they colonize more easily in stressed environments also. So due to climate change, a drought, we'll see infestations kind of rise and fall with those other environmental factors. It competes with native plants for water, sunlight, and nutrients. It's poor habitat for wildlife. They've done studies, and if you've ever gone into an Arundo monoculture, it's very difficult to get through. It increases fire frequency and intensity, so that's something we've used to our advantage to help promote this program to remove invasive species so that we're also removing biomass that's highly flammable. And then obviously it modifies stream bank morphology and hydrology. There are several options for Arundo removal. This goes anywhere from mechanical removal, just trying to dig out rhizomes. I guess one thing I didn't mention is there's as much above ground mass you see, there is a very dense mat of below ground mass. It doesn't go very deep, but it is very robust and dense to the point where there's almost no soil when you dig in there. It's just pure root rhizome material. So mechanical and hand removal is very slow, very timely. You're doing so much disturbance that it can actually increase erosion on steep banks and other things. You can use a foliar application of herbicide. So there's, which is just using a backpack sprayer or a big sprayer to spray the leaf foliage, whether in fall and spring, and I'll get back to that with some of our best management practices. There's also the cut, stump, and paint method, which I've highlighted here because that is the primary method that we like to use for a number of different reasons, but it's also the one kind of most kind of beneficial for the surrounding habitats, for our waterways, and the Integrated Pest Management Committee also really likes to see us, one, try and remove as much as we can manually, but if we have to use herbicides, this is the preferred method and also quite effective. And then lastly, just strict mowing, instant results, but it really only knocks it back. And there are biocontrol efforts, but none of them are feasible at this time. So we've used a contractor, Enviroscaping, who is our kind of maintenance contractor throughout the city, to apply these, to treat and apply herbicide. They have a qualified applicator license. They are licensed to use herbicide in these settings, and they're the ones who actually are on the ground applying these treatments. And we've calibrated kind of our treatment methods from many different sources to create these best management practices, one for applicator safety, but also wildlife safety, habitat longevity, and everything else. And this is pulled from the Santa Barbara County Weed Management Area, California Invasive Plant Council, and the UC statewide IPM program, as well as just kind of general experience if you've worked with Arundo over long periods of time. And so currently for our best management practices within the city, at any publicly accessible site, we post signage 72 hours before application and after. This is in any, public parks or open space areas where the public can, potentially come across an area that was treated previously. We do not conduct any treatment when wind speeds are above 10 miles per hour. This still applies when we're doing the cut and daub method, just because it's just best management practice to avoid any sort of drift that can occur. And we do not apply when rain is in the forecast within 72 hours. Just because unless you get, it can wash off easily within that time, and you want it to let it soak and kind of dig in. And then PPE, or personal protection equipment, is worn by applicators at all time. Tyvek gloves, long apparel, safety glasses, just to name a few. And so starting in 2008, this program's been around for quite a while, and it's been a while since we give you an update, and it's kind of gone through fits and starts with really concentrated efforts. And so in 2008, starting on Sycamore Creek, is where the bulk of treatments began, specifically with Arundo. We have some previous mapping from that time where we had much larger stands. This was an early concentrated effort to really knock out these monotypic areas of Arundo along our creeks. And from 2008 in Sycamore Creek, we then kind of moved westward through the city. So we targeted Mission Creek between 2010 and 2017, while then jumping over to Arroyo Burro, which was our focus for this year, basically since 2012. So Arroyo Burro had some fairly large infestations in the past, and this year we just wanted to kind of mop up, touch out on a few more of those spaces that have been previously treated, as well as a holdout stand that we finally got approval to go in and treat ourselves, and I'll show some photos of that later. So for this fiscal year, not calendar year, but from fall 2025 to spring, we really focused our efforts along Arroyo Burro Creek, San Roque Creek, and adjacent near Las Positas Creek at Arroyo Burro Open Space, Stevens Park, and some private parcels along Allen Road and Pescadero Drive and Hidden Valley. We also monitored and retreated some stands at the Andrea Clark Bird Refuge and along the property line with the Santa Barbara Zoo, which had received some treatments in the past, but given Arundo's life cycle, it does take some follow-up and some time to just fully kind of manage and eradicate successfully. And then we've done some additional community outreach and mapping. So we've talked to some property owners for kind of the next steps and next ideas along Sycamore Creek, where we're seeing some Arundo come back, and have mapped some of those areas just so we can kind of get a baseline of what we're dealing with currently. So these were within Arroyo Burro. These are some of the initial Arundo locations. We did a kind of preliminary survey in the late summer, fall of 2025, just to get an idea of where all these retreatment locations are happening. And one of those locations was this kind of Arundo holdout stand, which was on a private parcel adjacent to Arroyo Creek, but it was kind of the last full stand that had not yet been treated at all. And you can't tell in the photo, but it actually goes all the way to kind of that right side underneath some trees there as well. And so along with this stand and many others along Arroyo Creek and Las Positas and San Roque, this was one of the largest, and many of the other treatment stands along the way were anything from a couple stalks to, 7 or so stalks, just individual stalks that resprout. You get these rhizomes that really hold on even after treatments, and then a little bit of time and some rain, they'll come back. So this stand here is what we treated in fall of 2025, just showing our crews coming in and essentially just cutting the stalks down to get rid of the biomass. It is quite a lot of biomass when these stands get these large. And then they'll come through and give a fresh cut on the stems, and they'll paint those freshly cut stems. We'll use the blue dye just as an indicator to know what we've treated, so that way we're not double treating things, over applying, etc. And you can see kind of how localized it is to the cut stems. We can apply this to a large stand of arundo without hitting any of the adjacent vegetation. And so this is what was treated. This was a kind of follow-up survey after our round of initial treatments. Green is the fully treated locations that arundo was seen. Granted, when I say fully treated, that is just for that initial effort. Many of these sites will be followed up on and receive a secondary treatment. Kind of the best practice is to treat once in fall when the plants attempt to senesce and store resources into the rhizomes, and then again in spring when they're sending out new shoots and new stems again, because you're kind of hitting it at those sensitive windows of time where they're pulling down resources as well as the herbicide into the rhizomes to kill it more efficiently, as well as when there's new meritysmatic tissue in spring when the plant's actively growing. So there are a couple untreated spots that were missed. Some of these are 2 or so stalks growing up into willow trees that are very hard to see depending on the light and the time of day, and a couple others that were just didn't get fully treated effectively in that first round. So this is currently where we stand with Arroyo Burro as of now, and then come, another month or so, as things warm up, rains reduce, we'll come back through and do another full sweep and just comprehensively treat. We'll check on any of these spots to see if they need another treatment, as well as do a secondary treatment on those that need it. And then this is showing, this is the zoo property, as well as the bird refuge to the right-hand side. It's really minimal here, but I just wanted to kind of highlight this as another adjacent area that we treated this past year. A small patch kind of adjacent to the bird refuge, where kind of the train goes by, and then another tiny little patch in the parking lot. Some of the stuff along the fence and adjacent to the freeway that you might see as you're driving down the 101, some of that's on the railroad right away. We don't touch that, but there is some adjacent to the fence and our restoration area that we try and manage and control. And so a secondary species that we've targeted this past year was pampas grass, which we've seen a slight kind of resurgence lately. Many years ago, the county did a really concentrated effort to try and eradicate and remove a lot of pampas grass throughout the city, specifically along Las Positas Creek and Elings Park. I was able to find some old images in the specific areas we were going back to where they were manually excavating and pulling out these grasses. If you ever go up into Big Sur, you'll see a variety. It's the Jabuta grass, I think, variety up there. That's why I kind of put Cordaderia species, because there's 2 that even myself have trouble identifying in the field sometime, but they're very similar in life stage and growth. And so they're different than arundo in that they will spread by seed. So there are areas, particularly right now for me, around the Arroyo Burro open space and looking up into the hills where you'll see a single pampas grass way off on the hillside by itself, and it's just sending seeds down and just infiltrating, all these different areas. Again, it's different than arundo where it really is only moving vegetatively. This is wind dispersed seeds that are blowing all over the city, and if they find a good spot, they will recolonize the area. Again, it competes with native plants for water, sunlight, and nutrients. It's very much undesirable as food or shelter to birds and other wildlife, and it can cause physical harm to those animals. The leaves are very serrated and can cut you very easily. It is also an additional fire risk, increases frequency and intensity. And so we do the same thing with pampas grass in terms of using a cut and paint method to treat pampas grass. In our case this past year, we were fortunate to actually do a bit more mechanical and manual removal by digging up smaller resprouts that we found. We still had to treat some by cutting and daubing. You'll see kind of these large, older mounds that have, a couple sprigs coming out, and those you just can't really dig up too well. But there were a number of these little seedlings that we found that we were able to dig up. Again, Enviroscaping was our licensed pesticide applicator to treat and remove these populations. And again, we compiled a list of BMPs for treating pampas grass from all these different organizations. And so again, monitoring and retreatment was in these same areas: Arroyo Burro Creek, San Roque Creek at Hidden Valley Park, where we found a small stand, as well as the Arroyo Burro Open Space and Stevens Park's parcels. So again, monitoring and retreatment will continue throughout all these different areas wherever we see fit. Kind of one of my tasks has been to just actively mapping not all of what I see, but any of the ones that I think are causing source population issues to try and attempt and to manage in the future. And so these are just some examples of what we found. Specifically, this is kind of that old treated mound with some of these resprouts that, unless you have an excavator, you're not able to really manually dig up and remove. But we did find a number of these which are small enough that we can not use herbicide, dig up with a shovel. They don't root too easily as long as you keep the roots away from water and moisture, and they'll kind of die on their own. And so these, the mapping is a little bit tricky. These were just, again, those pre-survey maps to kind of show where we have some localized populations. And then in follow-up, once you actually get on the ground and start digging through the brush a bit, you'll find that there's a bit more. So, in the sense of creating a better visual of it, we don't drop, a ton of points where they all kind of glom together. But in this case specifically, which is where we found kind of the largest population of pampas grass, we were able to dig up 18 individuals by hand, and then 11 were cut and daubed in this specific area. And if you can kind of notice, there's a point here across the road, and that's where a small individual was seeding and growing across the road in that center median strip along the bike path. So I think even on Modoc Road, you might see an individual or two. They're very good at spreading. Once they establish, they get very large, and they're just going to kind of continue to take over. And any questions?
Committee Member Murray?
So the herbicide, it's a glyphosate-based herbicide. It is Roundup Custom, which is now called Aquamaster. Essentially the same product. The concentrations of glyphosate are slightly different. But in this case, because we're doing a cut and daub method, there's no dilution. We are applying kind of straight from the bottle, so to speak. But yes, it is a glyphosate-based herbicide. In the past, we've used other what we call cocktails, so herbicide cocktails, where we'll use glyphosate or a different ingredient to try and get a more effective treatment. And we've found that glyphosate by itself does the job without some of the other recurring effects or downstream effects that some of these other products can have. So yes, it is a glyphosate-based product.
Yeah, I've spent little parts of my career on and off and kind of have come to the same conclusion of just get the cross-section really quick and suck it down and nothing else is affected. I think I agree with you. It's the best management practice for this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Committee Member Gaskin?
Thank you. Does Barger have any infestations of these species?
Not of Arundo, and I have not seen pampas grass either. On the hillside, on the upland sections of Barger, there is castor bean and some other kind of perennial non-natives that we also like to target when we can, but for this program specifically, where we're getting approval by the IPM committee to use herbicides, we kind of present to them that we're only treating arundo and pampas grass in this setting. So as of now, we were up there just last week, I think, and I have not seen anything up there recently, so.
Yeah, historically, we haven't had any occurrence of either of them out there, thankfully.
Yeah.
It does seem like, and thank you, Evan, for such a great presentation. I just want to say, Evan, coming on with us in July, been here 6 months, he's done an amazing job picking this program back up. Kind of took a couple years of really minimal effort prior to that, and so he's really picked it up wonderfully and really gotten us back on track in Royal Borough, headed towards eradication there. So thank you to Evan. But I will say the pampas grass is really interesting. Where we see it is mostly more coastal. So really, there's a few patches on Elings Park that we would like to work with Elings Park Foundation to eventually target. And then there's some, unfortunately, kind of on Campanile Hill, for the best way to kind of describe it, and just really remote, just a few random individuals that are going to be challenging to get to, but ultimately would be nice too, because as Evan was kind of sharing with that segment along Las Positas, they are migrating into Arroyo Borough, and so we've seen a handful of individuals in Arroyo Borough Creek, but it's concerning over time that will continue.
Committee Member Murray?
I just, my hat's off to you. I know what a hard job this is, and it's great that you're on it. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to be tasked with it because it is very rewarding to go in and remove some of these, highly invasive species and be able to kind of pick up where things left off and continue kind of a longer effort and keep that momentum going, because it is a question of time for some of these things on when they can kind of get to a point of, increased costs, increased time, increased management again. So being able to pick that up and tackle it again is very rewarding. And it's, in my mind, always better to see a creek and a waterway without these species. So, yeah.
Committee Member Heller?
Thank you. I'm a neighbor of Elings Park, and we formed a neighborhood association to deal with the fire risk that the park has represented because it was rezoned as high fire hazard a few years ago, and until recently, the park's relationship to that was pretty lackadaisical. So if you are trying to reach the park to deal with the issue of reduced fire risk, which obviously pampas grass really represents, consider my neighborhood association willing supporters. And I don't know if you're aware, but their executive director just moved on to another job, so they do not currently have an ED. They have a director of operations.
Great. Yeah, that's good to know, because that's between Elings Park and, like Erin mentioned, the Campanile hillside, there's a few sources up there that we'd love to get to.
And I guess just one more thing, arundo has been the focus of this program since its existence, and we added pampas grass basically 2 years ago, seeing this emerging need, and so we're always open to input from the committee on other, areas of concern and species we could consider adding to this program.
I have a question. What is the best avenue for community members who notice these or other invasive species in their creeks to notify the city and get them addressed?
Yeah, absolutely. And the best thing to do as far as now is to try and reach out to creeks and email us about those. We have made flyers in the past, have you seen this plant, with a photo of arundo, and, have little handouts and things that kind of just give a brief, if you see this, contact us. We're more than willing to work with homeowners that have, these species on their property at no cost to them. We come in and remove them. That's the great thing about this program, is it's really an incentive to homeowners to come to us so that we can take care of it for you. So as of now, I think there's, again, community outreach component is definitely something we want to kind of pick back up a little bit more actively over this past year, and then moving into some of the new creeks again, like Sycamore Creek, working with them. We've had a homeowners come to us about some of those already. So that's kind of where we're picking that back up. And yeah, in terms of, unfortunately with some of these species, it's not an easy thing for a homeowner to deal with on their own. But if they kind of reach out and propose this to us, then we're happy to go in and take care of it.
Thank you.
And I'll just add, as far as education, we do have some information on our website about these species, but also other, species of concern, and just methods of removal and things property owners can do on their own. Currently, the program availability for us to help as a resource to private property owners is just focused on Arundo and pampas grass.
Any other questions from committee members? And then we move to public comment and then committee comment. Is there any public comment?
No, Chair.
Is there any comment from the committee other than questions? Committee member Gaskin.
Thank you. I'm just really proud that the Creeks Division is doing this. Those things are horrible, and I just so appreciate the attention and effort. And have you guys talked at all about Cape Ivy? Or
Yeah, and so Cape Ivy is something we actively target and manage with our maintenance crews on, I can't say every stretch of the creeks. It's mainly in our restoration areas or our actively managed areas. Cape Ivy is one of those ones, we're going in there, we're trying to pull it down. We kind of knock it back in terms of a kind of long-term eradication method. It's a bit more tricky in terms of going through IPM and trying to get those approvals and for this program, but it is something we actively manage, particularly in our restoration areas and most of our creek areas, open space spots. But yeah, and I know there is some potential for biocontrol efforts with Cape Ivy, which would be, a potential option. It's been 20 years in the making, and we'll see where that goes, but it's pretty aggressive.
I can just add to that we were working a few years, 5 or 6 years ago, with a student at UCSB who was doing some releases in a Arroyo Borough watershed for that biocontrol agent, so in the Hidden Valley area. And unfortunately, it just seemed like none of those populations were successful long term. So, we haven't specifically targeted Cape Ivy, I think, because we were so hopeful that maybe this biocontrol was going to be this silver bullet that really helped keep it in check in our watersheds. And so I think, the answer to that is still out there. We're not sure, but we're still hopeful because, it is very challenging. Both English ivy and Cape ivy, obviously super invasive, would be challenging species for us to take on as part of this program, just because of how robust they are and how long term.
Any other comments from the committee? Then I think that's the last item. Thank you guys for the presentation, and we will adjourn this meeting at 6:49.